Right. So today we are continuing with our history of Zimbabwe. We are not stopping. We have to move. So we are going to look into the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland. That is the Central African Federation. And it was established in 1953 up to 1963. The reason why the Y started this federation was to sort of prolong the colonization. Yes, they wanted to prolong the colonization. But colonization, it was delayed. And at the same time, they had already read that there was now a great wave of African nationalism, which was it was blowing around Africa. So that's why they had to come up with this Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland. So in 1953, Zimbabwe was southern Rhodesia, right? Yeah. So in 1953, southern Rhodesia, northern Rhodesia, and Nyasaland. Nyasaland is present day what? Malawi. Right. So southern Rhodesia, northern Rhodesia, and Nyasaland were all controlled by the British. So they had to form one thing. So a federation is a union of what? Of states. So a myriad of reasons led to the establishment of the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland. So there were the reasons for the establishment of the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland. So we'll start with economic reasons. The economic reasons, like number one, the Federation would enable the Central African region to prosper and develop faster than was possible in the three territories as separate entities. What they are simply saying here is the Federation yaizoita kuti pakurumidze kuva paine development because vanga vabatanidza zvinhu three zvangofani kuti ungabatanidza mashopu tishopu one zvinokurumidza kufaya. So Southern Rhodesia would provide agricultural products and minerals because the Southern Rhodesia, which is present day Zimbabwe, which is our Zimbabwe, is very rich in minerals, and we have one of the best climates in the world. So there was also Northern Rhodesia, which would provide copper, and Nyasaland would provide labor. So tumadhara twedu kana sekuru wangu ino waitobva kuMalawi futi. Those were the people who provided labor. And tokangwara tongotuseka hedu but ukatasa dzimba dzichinzi marokesheni even unana chitumbidza unana iti tumadhara itu twedu ende hatufi zvekumhanya kanenge karipo kachitora mari yemaroja. So ndine karibu kuna samuriyo kanga mudhara kedu so kanotoita kakatorarama ndingakusvika ma90 years. He has a big house, tone juraho nechichi totokangwara because ndo vanhu vakatanga kushandira varungu. Nyasaland was there to provide the labor, right? So the settlers in the three territories wanted to share profits of agriculture, gold and copper. So after coming up with something like that, the federation would attract what? Foreign investors or foreign direct investment, and that would promote industrialization. Obviously, being at the kunze dzikatonoti federation muzviri kufaya vaibva vatoya nebhegi voisachi votanga votofaisa zvinhu vanhu vakutowana mabasa and stuff. And munguva yecolonialism period yefederation ndo period yakanyanya futi kuitika like sort of an economic boom stereki, right? Because at the same time ma-whites aida kuitonga sokuti akunyengerera Zimbabwe. So zvinhu zvacho ukatarisa ndo pakavakwa even malocations mazhinji even system remaflats area ndo parakabva ratoitwa cutaway. Of course mahostels ndo akatanga but wakatanga kuvakawo dzimba dzimwe dzine maturums nechidze malocations dzese dziya yes kwakuda kutraya kuda kufadza kwakuchida kutraya kuda kufadza machi ma-blacks, right? Because vanga vakufira varungu vanga vakufira kuti panapa anytime togona kudonhedzwa nevanawo so vanga vakutraya kuda kuita tumitunhu. So so the federation would also cut administration costs. Why? Because Nyasaland was under the British, Southern Rhodesia was under the British, and so was Northern Rhodesia. So vakangoti tikangozvisa zvese panzvimbo one admin zvine zvikashamitsi kudini kurana, zvangofanira kuti une zvikoro 3 ndinogona kurana kunetsa kurana, but ukazvisa panzvimbo 1 wototi same jurawo mune primary nesecondary wozviganhura, zvinobatsiridza pakudini pakurana, because unenge wakurana chinhu chiri panzvimbo 1. Ndosa uchiona vanhu vanotaura zvebusiness vanoti usakurumidze kuita mabranch usati wanyatsa usimba. Zviri nani kuti usungirire pa1 euro, because ukaita 3 zogona kudhakwira. Alright. So the settler motive for creating the federation was to create a large and more diversified national economy. Such a big economic unit like the federation would attract the capital needed to develop the projects like railway development and a big hydroelectric power scheme, since the copper belt was now finding it difficult to supply the power needs of the 3 territories. So the federation would provide a big market for goods produced in the federation, and like planning on an overall scale would be far more effective, enabling maximum use of raw materials, power, labor, and also skills. And there was sort of a desire to enhance cooperation in capital infrastructural development, because they had pooled all the resources in one place. So it was easy to organize everything. So there were also political reasons for the formation of the federation. Like the federation was meant to foster settler domination and supremacy over the Africans. Like it was now easy. It's easy to control. Because tikangoti tinongorana Zimbabwe chete, vanhu vekumalawi vakati vari kuda freedom, zvinonetsa, vanondogona amedzi zacho. So vakangoti tikazvibatanidza, it would foster settler domination and supremacy over Africans. And settlers in northern Rhodesia believed their position would be strengthened by the many settlers in southern Rhodesia. And from a political point of view, the whites saw a federation as a way of perpetrating their supremacy by denying the political advancement of Africans in the 2 northern territories whose constitutional position was different from that of southern Rhodesia. So the federation was also established because of the need to preserve white rule in Central Africa, as they feared that Africans might revolt against the whites in Central Africa. And Africans had already started forming trade unions and political parties, like I said. Yes, there was a growing wave of freedom that was blowing around Africa. So the whites were now scared. That's the reason why they came up with this federation. So this federation would protect whites in the 3 territories from nationalistic calls for independence. It would also check the rise of African nationalism. They wanted to sort of thwart or to suppress nationalistic feelings. And the federation was going to make it much easier to control blacks under one administration as compared to what was happening before. Like I said, it was so difficult to control Tamautas blacks in Zambia or Tamautas blacks in Zimbabwe. You know, like when I say Tamautas, like vanarukupisa varutoda freedom, vanonetsa kucontrol. So tikagadzira nyika 1, it will be easy to control. So again, the federation would enable the Africans and the Europeans to work in a partnership. They would work in the partnership, but the partnership was unfair. One of the prime ministers at that time, called Roy Welensky, described it as the partnership of the rider and the horse. So the whites were the riders, then the Africans were the horses, which means panekuitisana kurikitika between the 2 people. Yes, ava ndo vari kurida kana kuti vari kushandisa ava for their own selfish benefits, right? So many settlers feared being politically overwhelmed by larger African majorities north of the Zambezi. The federation was seen as a more promising vehicle to attain autonomous dominion status. And again, the federation would also check the spread of apartheid from South Africa, and the rise of African nationalism too. Like the English-speaking white minorities of the 2, Rhodesia and Nyasaland, having noted out the possibility of joining the Afrikaner-dominated South Africa, wanted the federation to contain African nationalism in southern Rhodesia and prevent impending independence of the protectorates of northern Rhodesia and Nyasaland, which they perceived in terms of creeping communism and nationalism. So the whites again wanted to prevent the absorption of southern Rhodesia by the Union of South Africa, and the federation would make a strong British colony able to compete with what? With the South Africa too, because in South Africa, Vanguard competition among South Africans. And again, like the whites wanted to create a strong British military stronghold in Central Africa, and they also wanted to check Afrikaner nationalism. So there were also social reasons. The social reasons was like they wanted to make Africans much more inferior in the eyes of the whites. Yes, they wanted to perpetuate that racial bigotry to ensure that the Africans were what? Were inferior to the whites, and the federation was meant to racially undermine the blacks, and they also wanted to improve cooperation among the whites, and the federation would improve the availability of electricity, and they wanted to create a bastion of British culture in Central Africa, and it would encourage its settlement and increase white population in the federation. They also wanted to improve my social services. Kufadza vanhu vatema, so vakatanga kuita sort of improve the education and the health, and the education was quite good at that time. Yes, so that's the three territories would benefit from common facilities. Ndikakutorera chembere yakadzidza time yatiri kutaura itoti taurai chirungu izvozvi unotoona kuti munhu uya. So what were the achievements of the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland? Number one, since they pulled all the resources together, there was rapid industrial growth during the federal decade, like from 1953 to 1963, especially in Salisbury. So my historians mamanotsanangura achiti federation yakanyanya kufavira Salisbury, which is present day Harare. Like my developments mazhinji akanyanya kuitika kuSalisbury. So thus there was employment creation largely in Salisbury. There were improvements in transport. For example, a railway line was constructed which linked Bulawayo with Maputo, Lorenzo Marques, like that railway line which comes from like Mozambique, passes through the Eastern Corridor into Mutare, up to Harare, So there was also improvements in the education system during the federal period. For instance, the University of Rhodesia and Nyasaland, that's when it was established in 1957 in Mount Pleasant, which is the present-day University of Zimbabwe. And you find out kuti ma developments are under Rhodesia and Nyasaland, but Salisbury, and even after independence, we inherited some of those things, So the university greatly benefited Southern Rhodesia intellectually, infrastructurally, and economically. Why? Because there were, in that federal period, there were some infrastructural developments which were taking place. So you need educated people who gadzira zuma roads, who gadzira mademu nechinchi. So some of them were taught or they got their education and expertise from the university. So however, Zambian and Malawi students were also afforded a chance to learn at the University of Rhodesia and Nyasaland. And Africans in these three territories were able to acquire higher qualifications. But you find out that the point that I mentioned, on the dissolution of the federation, Southern Rhodesia inherited these facilities and others, including the Federal Army equipment. So more so, there was construction of many secondary schools. For example, the Fletcher High School in Gweru, Mulezo Agricultural College, many teachers' colleges, Mutare Teachers' College, Gweru Teachers' College, they were all established during that period, and they were inherited by what? By Southern Rhodesia. There was also the construction of dams and lakes in the federation. For example, Lake Mutirikwi, which was built in 1960, that is around the Masvingo area, if I'm not mistaken. Hippo Valley and Triangle Estates were irrigated using water from Lake Kyle. The federation also built the world's famous Kariba Dam. That's when it was built for hydroelectricity purposes. That was in 1959. It should be noted that Kariba was the biggest man-made lake in the world. Thus, the biggest of the federal scheme was the plan to harness Zambezi River at Kariba Gorge by constructing a dam which would supply Magetsi for the copper belt and the industrial region of Southern Rhodesia. So the construction of Kariba Dam also stimulated the fishing industry. Even up to now, there is a thriving fishing industry in the Zambezi, in Kariba. So it also made possible irrigation projects. For example, the Sabi irrigation and a number of sugar estates were also developed. So hydroelectric power was boosted, right? Like at Kariba and Kafu. However, the one at Kafu generated less power. Zambia and Zimbabwe shared electricity from what? from Kariba. So there was also development of agriculture during the federal decade. For instance, there were irrigation schemes which were built in Kafu, that's in Zambia, in Chirundu, in Hippo Valley Estate, Triangle, Sugar Plantation, and Mlanje Tea Estate. There was increased output, for example, tobacco, tea, coffee, and sugarcane. There was also development of research stations for agriculture as well as forestry. Wange Thermal Power Station was also built, and it also supplied electricity in the region. And we also have a number of health facilities which were also improved. A number of large, well-equipped hospitals were built in big centers like Salisbury, Bulawayo, Kitwe, and Blantyre. For instance, the present day, we call it Salimgado Hospital. It was previously Harare Hospital. It was also built in Salisbury. So foreign investment was attracted, resulting in the growth of Salisbury as the capital of the Federation and the construction of the hydroelectricity power station at Kariba. So we find out that there was great economic boost. The economy was booming. The economy was flourishing. The economy was flying. So the gross domestic product rose from 350.6 million pounds in 1954 to 448 million pounds in 1956. African workers in towns felt some benefit from the boom in improved wages and working conditions. It is therefore generally recognized that the period of federation was one of increased economic prosperity, but some authorities disagree on the contribution of the federation itself made to its state of affairs. More so, exports also increased, like by 74% through Beira, South Africa, and Tanzania. We're exporting some goods like it was just out of this world. There was increased production in mining, in gold, in copper, in asbestos. So there was increased industrial output, especially in southern Rhodesia. Iron and steel, as well as food processing industries, were built in cities like Bulawayo, Salisbury, and Lusaka in Zambia. It must be noted that new industries were opened and old ones were expanded too. So there was a great employment in creation for both Africans and the whites in industry, agriculture, and forestry. But last but not least, we understand that the federation collapsed, right? Yes. Number one, unequal development. It meant the federation was going to be doomed from the start. I think I mentioned the issue that Southern Rhodesia was benefiting at the expense of other regions, especially Nyasaland. So, so for example, the University of Zimbabwe, Kariba Dam, the capital Salisbury, were all in Southern Rhodesia. And Southern Rhodesia had the most parliamentary seats in the parliament. Thus, the constitution of the federation was biased towards Southern Rhodesia. And Southern Rhodesia had many industries than in other territories. In addition, the headquarters of the railways were in Southern Rhodesia. I'm sure it was in Bulawayo. So hence Southern Rhodesia was monopolizing everything. So the two northern territories, specifically Northern Rhodesia and Nyasaland, were now complaining due to that developmental disparity. They were now saying Southern Rhodesia is the one which is only benefit at the expense of us. Again, like I said, the existence of the federation coincided with a great wave of African nationalism. So there was no way it was going to last for more than those 10 years. Yes. So there was opposition from African nationalists, which led to the collapse of the federation. And this includes Kamuzu Banda, Henry Kumbula, like from the ANC party in Zambia, once declared, we know that our brothers in the south are slaves. So the segregatory laws led to the upsurge of African nationalism. And to further compound or to aggravate the situation, the demand for dominion status by settlers worsened opposition in these three territories. And Africans in the two northern territories agitated for political independence because there was also economical unfairness. There was economical unfairness. So from the outset, nationalists in the two northern territories were opposed to the federation. Why? Because free. So they saw the federation as a barrier against the aspiration for advancement towards self-determination. So it was like a hurdle which was stopping them to achieve the self-determination. Again, like I said, mistiming. One of the reasons why it failed, it was mistiming, right? Yes. It was established at the wrong time. Yes. So again, that partnership of a horse and a rider was never going to last. Especially Roy Welensky wachakatotaura nemuromo wake. Vanhu vakabva vatotai vatida kuzonoti zvogumira kupi. So again, Britain foot, Britain purchase, I think we once mentioned it yesterday. It had sort of changed its policy and granting colonies independence to that period. Britain iyo purchase right. Yanga yane imwe yawo yekuti yanga singachadi kuita zvekucolonize because yanga yatova apartheid because nyika zhinji dzemaAfrica at that time dzadza kuita free. So yakasvikopa point yepressure yekuti hatichadi. That's why kunoti pakazoita unilateral declaration of independence around 1962-1963 because Britain had weaned itself, or Britain had what like relieved itself from the colonial issues. So varungu vanga varimo ndo vakazosara vachizionera. Britain yanga nimwe kuti zvekucolonize zvapfuura zvakutotinetsa. Chiitai zvamunoti takacolonize nguva yanalo Bengula yanechi aperiod ino zvakutinetsa. Itai murubiti. So the federation didn't have the backup of the British government right from London, right from Britain. So the federation collapsed because not all settlers wanted the federation. For example, Colonel Stewart was opposed to it. Like Mangoma settlers acho pachezvavo vanga vasingatodi federation. And again, trade unionism and worker organization in Northern Rhodesia, Southern Rhodesia, Nyasaland opposed the federation. Those are strikes, demonstrations, and petitions to show their dislike of the what of the federation, something like that. So that's it for this topic. So we'll be starting the second Chimringa from next week.